All right, we're going to be taking a look at a question that I know a lot of people out there are going to be asking. I've got the A7 IV. Should I be getting the brand new FX2? Because they do share pretty much the same sensor. There's a whole bunch of new specs, obviously, in the FX2. It's in the new FX sort of 3, FX30 style body. There's an internal fan. There's a whole bunch of cool features, but the price, because this is the biggest determining factor if you're going to be picking up the FX2. So $32.99 for the A7 IV or $52.99 Australian dollars for the FX2. So there is a significant price gap between these two cameras, considering that they pretty much share the same sensor and most of the internals are pretty much the same. So this is going to be a really big thing that you need to take into consideration now. But think about all the specs that the newer camera has that we're going to be talking about in this video. So it's a lot closer than you think, but sort of kind of further apart than you think. But also, I do have to mention the North American prices are completely different to the Australian prices. Now, the Sony A7 IV actually comes in at $24.98 USD, whereas the FX2 comes in at $26.98 USD. So it's only 200 US more than the A7 IV. This changes everything. When it comes to the Australian prices, $32.99 and $52.99 is significantly different. So we do have to take this into consideration for Australian buyers to North American buyers, and obviously European buyers will be different as well. So both of these cameras sports the 33 megapixel BSI CMOS sensor. Now the FX2 has that internal AI processing chips, which allows you to have a whole bunch of extra features that the A7 IV doesn't have. So let's compare some of these new features that the FX2 has that the A7 IV doesn't. So now that AI processor does allow for better autofocus. Now, when it comes to autofocus, it's pretty much the same as the ZV-E1, the A7R5, all the newer Sony cameras that has that AI processor. It just gives you a little bit more juice when it comes to that object tracking and a little bit more stickiness. Now, also one major feature that the AI processor does give is dynamic active stability. Now, this is in all of the newer Sony cameras when it comes to stability. Essentially, it's just extra digital stabilization. So it will crop in at about 30% and give you extreme amounts of digital stabilization. Now at this point in time, the A7 IV only has the active stability, which still is digital stabilization. It's a very small crop, but you still get extra a little bit over that 5 stops of IBIS. Now the FX2 pretty much has the same 5 stops of IBIS. You do have the active stability, but you have that extra dynamic active stability. So if you are comparing the FX2 to the A7 IV when it comes to stabilization, the FX2 is going to win here. Now additionally, when it comes to stabilization, the FX2 has framing stabilizer. So essentially when you select this feature and when you walk, it will actually crop in just like dynamic active stability and make sure that your person is inside the frame and just digitally stabilize it to make sure you have the best stabilization possible. And now when you have some tripod shots, you do actually have auto reframing. So essentially auto reframing is that it makes it look like you have a videographer framing you. So you can have 3 different framing sizes, pretty much small, medium, large, and it will crop in quite significantly. But if you do move around the frame, it will actually follow you around the frame. You can do this in post-production, so you do have the same resolution and the same sensor, so you can pretty much make it look exactly the same. But I do have to mention that this is done inside the FX2. So if you don't know how to do this in post-production, it just makes it so much easier and quicker to do so, obviously in camera. Now, when it comes to being in the FX line and the FX size body, it does have that internal fan. Now, a lot of people were getting some overheating issues with the A7 IV. I've never had overheating issues with the A7 IV, but if you were getting overheating issues with the A7 IV, the FX2 has an internal fan. You do have a few fan controls that you can actually control it, but you've got active cooling, so you shouldn't get any kind of overheating issues, which obviously is great, and it's so much more reliable when you actually put it into, professional situations, Zooms, podcasts, and just long filming sessions. Now, additionally, with that active cooling, with the new design, if you do actually have the screen shut, it does have a vent at the top and the bottom where you still can get airflow if the screen is shut. Now, there is a vent on the left-hand side as well, but you should be flipping your screen out anyway away from the body because that's going to be generating less heat, and it's just going to be better for your sensor and for the overall camera performance to have that screen away from the body. Now also when it comes to that FX style body, this is the one thing that is different to the FX30 and FX3, and that happens to come down to that tilting EVF. Now they are pretty much identical EVFs in terms of resolutions, about 3.68 or 3.69 million dots, but the FX2 is a tilting EVF, so it can tilt up to 90 degrees and all the way flat. But this could actually be beneficial for those people who actually like to utilize the EVF when actually recording. For me personally, on these smaller cameras, I don't like to do that at all. It generally suits a lot of people who do a lot of shoulder mounting stuff or tripod mounting stuff. Obviously, when it comes to tripod mounting, this is where you would see the benefits because you can tilt it up to that 90 degrees, look straight down into that EVF, whereas the A7 IV, you don't have a tilting EVF, so you actually have to go down to that eye level, just bend down a little bit, and it's still going to get similar results. It's just obviously a little bit easier when it comes to that tilting EVF. But also when it comes to monitoring, they do have that same back screen when it comes to the resolution, so you're not going to get any differences with that 3-inch articulating screen. Now, one cool thing about the FX2, it does also have a mechanical shutter. So you do have pretty much identical stills capabilities inside the FX2, which obviously is a plus. You do have 10 frames per second when it comes to burst mode in stills. But if you do select it into RAW, you generally go down to about 6 to 7 frames per second, which is still fantastic because you got 33 megapixel RAW stills. But realistically, when it comes to stills performance, they are identical in both of these cameras. Okay, so now when it comes to video resolution, this is where they're pretty much identical.
Except there is one difference that the FX line has over all the other Sony cameras is that this has DCI 4K in 24 frames per second, whereas the A7 IV doesn't.
The A7 IV does actually have something that the FX2 doesn't have, and that comes down to 10-bit 422 with 1080p. So if you do actually go into S&Q mode in the A7 IV, you can actually get 10-bit 422 codec with that 1080p codec. Sure, it does slow it down in the camera, but the FX2 doesn't have that. You can do 1080p at 120 frames per second, but it is only 8-bit 420 codec in the FX2. But when it comes to the 4K 25 and 50 frames per second, they're pretty much identical. You got full frame 25 and 30 frames per second, but if you do go into the 50 and 60 frames per second, they're both a 1.5 times crop. So you're not going to get any differences between these two cameras.
Now, if we are to talk about the rolling shutter performance of both of these cameras, obviously they're the same sensor, so you're going to get same performance, 26.8 milliseconds for just regular full frame 4K, which obviously is not great in 2025. But if this is something that you don't really take into consideration when purchasing a camera, then it's perfectly fine. Majority of people won't even notice rolling shutter issues, but I do have to report what the rolling shutter is on this video. Now, one thing you do see the difference when it comes to the menu system is that the FX2 has the very similar menu system as the FX3. You can pretty much swipe up as well or swipe across and it will give you quick access menus. It's really nice and I do like this setup.
Now, the one difference you will see when it comes to recording codecs is that the FX2 actually has Cine EI, which is essentially Sony's cinema line codec. And this allows you to utilize the two base ISOs. Now, this is where it differs just a little bit. The FX2 has a base ISO of 800 and 4000, whereas the A7 IV has a base ISO of 800 and 3200. So there is a little bit of a difference when it comes to the performance in that second ISO level, because it generally tends to clean up when you hit the 4000, or in the A7 IV, it'll clean up when it gets to 3200.
So even though the FX2 is a 33 megapixel sensor, the noise performance is fantastic. Even at 12,800, you compare this against the FX30. Obviously, the FX30 doesn't perform as good, but if we put it up against the FX3/ZVE1 sensor, the 12 megapixel low light beast, it holds up incredibly well. I've always said this with the A7 IV sensor, that it's super clean in low light situations, and it really is a great sensor when you're trying to do a lot of run and gun stuff throughout the full ISO range.
Now, one major feature that the FX2 has that no other Sony camera has right now, that happens to be the Big 6 menu. Now that Big 6 menu is going to be coming in the FX30, the FX3 and the FX6 in a future firmware update around about September, October sort of time, but the FX2 has this now. Now it also has the home button that you can press, which brings up that Big 6 menus. Now the Big 6 menu essentially just gives you a whole bunch of options where you can adjust the major functions of the camera. Now if you do actually have a monitor mounted directly onto the camera, this could actually be beneficial because you can keep the Big 6 menu on and then monitor the image in that monitor. But look, overall, it doesn't affect the image quality or performance of the camera. It just makes it a little bit easier for some people who are used to using the Big 6 menu. Now, what we do see when it comes to what kind of cards both of these cameras have, they have the CF Express Type A and SD card slot, but then also a second SD card slot. So they're pretty much identical there. Usually the FX line will have two CF Express Type A card slots, but the FX2 for some reason doesn't, and they're pretty much identical there. Now, when it comes to the I/O ports on the left-hand side, you've got the HDMI port, you've got the USB-C, you've got the micro USB, then you also got your headphone jack in and out. So they're pretty much identical. It's just a slightly different setup on the FX2 than it is on the A7 IV. Now, if you do like to load in your own LUTs when it comes to the Sony cameras, well, you can do this with the FX2. You can get up to about 15 LUTs in the camera, whereas the A7 IV, you can't do that. Now, it doesn't bake it onto the file, so it's just like a preview LUT, which obviously is great for those kind of people who actually like to preview what it looks like in post-production. But if that doesn't suit your workflow, then it doesn't matter, but that's still a win with the FX2. Now, one pretty major win that I do love that my FX6 has is pretty much two mounting points at the bottom. Now the FX30 and FX3 doesn't have this, but the FX2 does. So if you do actually have a base plate that actually has two 1/4 mounts, you can put it at the bottom and it won't swivel around on any kind of tripod or gimbals, which is really good for cinema cameras. Now, one major pro that the FX2 has over the A7 IV happens to be that top handle that we see with the FX30 and FX3. So you can actually screw the exact same top handle directly into this FX2 and have XLR inputs going directly into the camera through that top handle, which is fantastic. Now you can do very similar with the A7 IV with the XLR attachment, but there isn't a handle there. So that is a bit of a pro with the FX2 over the A7 IV with that one, if you like utilizing the XLR inputs directly into the camera. Otherwise, they both have that multi-interface hot shoe. We can utilize all the ECM microphones like the ECM B1M that I'm using right now, and they're fantastic microphones.
Now, just in terms of the body design itself, the grip is a little bit thicker and the ergonomics seem to be set up more towards holding it with video, which is fantastic. Now, it does have that rocker zoom on the front, which we do see in the FX30 and FX3, which allows you to get just nice, smooth zooms. And just like the FX30 and FX3, we do have 1.3 and 2 times anamorphic D-squeeze in the camera. Similarly, in the Cine line, we do have tally lamps as well. Tally lamps are great, obviously, to let you know that you are recording. And another professional feature is that the FX2 has time code, which you can gem sync directly in, which is obviously incredible if you do multi-cam shooting. Now, one thing we do see in the Cine line is the ability to do RAW recording externally into the Atomos Ninja 5, which gives us ProRes RAW. Now, this will give us ProRes RAW, but it is only in the Super 35 crop mode. But if ProRes RAW is something you like working with, then obviously the FX2 is going to be your best bet. Now, one thing we do see in the newer Sony cameras is the vertical interface. So if you do end up putting your camera in that vertical orientation, it's going to be flipping the menu, so it's just a lot easier to read.
So look, overall, when you take the price into consideration right at this point, $32.99 for the A7 IV, $52.99 for the FX2. It's really hard to recommend the FX2. You may as well get the A7 IV and pretty much a G Master lens and you're good to go. The price is the big determining factor if you're going to be picking up the FX2. Like, sure, the FX2 has a lot of features, a lot of brand new features that the A7 IV doesn't have, which could be beneficial in some situations, but it really depends on what you do. Do you need that internal fan? Do you need that AI processor, which gives you a whole bunch of those extra features? Do you need to utilize the top handle? These are the things that you need to consider if it's going to be suiting your workflow. But for the price, look, you could pretty much get the FX3 and get a significantly better camera when it comes to the image quality in terms of higher frame rates. But you do have to take it into consideration that the a7 IV is a fantastic camera. It does photos really well. It does video pretty decent. Sure, the rolling shutter performance isn't amazing when it comes to 2025, but still you're going to get a great camera with the a7 IV. And if you get a used a7 IV, I mean, you could get it really, really cheap. But the decision is up to you. I'm giving you a whole bunch of information and the tools to hopefully help you make your decision. But thanks for watching, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, let's get it.